Hello and welcome to the Messy Middle. Today, I'm very pleased to have Cindy Gardner on the show with me today. Cindy began her career in corporate, working in sales and marketing for multiple Fortune 500 companies, including Bristol Myers Squibb, AT&T, and Lucent Technologies. With an undeniable calling into the world of human potential, she naturally stepped in the coaching arena where she works with leaders from all walks of life on recognizing and developing their potential while helping to build their skills around the kind of traits that go largely undeveloped within organizations, the ones that are uniquely and deeply human, and develop the heart every bit as much as the mind. She also helps to guide her clients on a profound journey of self-discovery to unleash their voices powerfully, purposefully, and confidently, and to experience full self-expression in all areas of their lives. Cindy is passionate about raising consciousness and building courage and has guided thousands of people on a transformational journey to discover their infinite, unlimited potential through her powerful work as lead trainer at the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching, a global coach training organization based in Shrewsbury, New Jersey. So welcome, Cindy. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Great to be with you, Laura.
Yes, I can't wait to dig into this topic. But what I'd like to start with, so we've heard your bio, we've heard about your professional journey. Can you tell me a little bit about your story behind the scenes?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great starting point because I think there will be some pretty strong connection points to the topic of our discussion, which of course is all about values. And so I'll start by saying, just jumping in to my professional career. So I started out really in the corporate space. By the way, that's what I thought I was supposed to do. Given the way that I was raised, I always had this message of this is what you do. After you go to high school, you graduate, you go to college, and then you get a job in the corporate world. So, okay, that's what I'm supposed to do. So that's essentially what I did. And so in that setting, I was in a marketing role, just very different aspects of marketing. And in fact, I went back to school and even got my MBA in marketing. So I was very, very steeped in marketing.
Wow.
And I spent 16 years in the corporate space. And while I made lots of friends and great connections, really terrific relationships that I still have to this day, one thing that I'm just so present to is how dead my soul felt when I went to work. I felt anything but alive. And I just thought that's the way it was. I figured other people around me felt the same way. Kind of seemed like we were all sort of like soldiers, it's like marching into the office every day, head down, do the tasks, don't get in trouble, like try and minimize any collateral damage anywhere around you, and then pack it all up at the end of the day and go home. And like, that was it. That was the march, time and time again over the course of 16 years. And in that space, I have to say, and this is a really important part of my story, is that oftentimes I didn't feel like I could speak up, that I couldn't offer my thoughts or ideas because I was so afraid that people would think my ideas were stupid, they were unworthy, that nobody really wanted to hear what I had to say and what I had to offer up. So I would say, if I had to characterize my behavior and how I was showing up, I wasn't really showing up. I wasn't showing up powerfully. I wasn't showing up in a way where I was really visible. And I was okay with that because I was more afraid of being judged.
Wow.
And I think, honestly, it's so easy for me to say this now and to be in this realization now at this time in my life and in my career. But there was such a weight that I was carrying that was so heavy that I didn't know until I got to the other side of it and could really breathe and say, aha, this is what was happening for me. And this is what I will no longer allow to happen. And so part of the process of sort of finding my way and going into the next chapter of my life really was stepping out of that paradigm of what I knew, what I had been, I'm going to say trained to do. Like, this is how you develop, and this is what you do, and this is what you do for a career, and this is where you go and have that career, was really shifting that paradigm and opening myself up to a completely different world of possibility, which, by the way, I had no idea existed. It's like I was navigating with blinders on. And so I switched out of the corporate space in terms of, working in that space for someone else, and ultimately shifting careers altogether to become an executive coach, a leadership strategist is what I call myself, and running my own business today, and doing it with, I'm going to say, effortlessly, weightlessly, certainly with my voice in the mix, right? That old Cindy that was in corporate would not be sitting here today, would never be, oh my gosh, I'm using my voice. I would be terrified to do that. And so through my evolution of where I am today, I often describe it as becoming unrecognizable to myself. And really, the truth of the matter is returning to the me that was always there, that I could never, ever see.
Amazing.
Until now.
Yeah. I love that. I think so many people can probably relate to your story. And I mean, I feel the same way in terms of some of the roles I've had in my career. So I think discomfort can be such a great catalyst. What was it for you that kind of, you said you saw it on once you were on the other side? What got you to take that first step, do you think?
Yeah, great question. And the discomfort, can be quite a motivator. It's when the discomfort of staying where you are becomes so great that it's like, I have to move out of this space. Until that point, it's like, well, it seems more uncomfortable to leave this space, so I'll just kind of stay where I am and put my head down. And so, there were a couple of things. I mean, there were moments where, lots of them, where I would just marvel at the ability of other people to just kind of say what was so for them, share their thoughts, share their viewpoints, share their opinions. I thought, why is it that I feel like I can't do that? And so I will say that, part of my story is that I always had a desire to do one of two things as a career. One was to work in the world of marketing, and the other was to become a therapist. But again, given my training, and when I say my training, I mean like the way that I was raised and the sort of the cues and clues that I got of, this is the path you really ought to take in order to be successful in life. And that's the path that I went down, the one that I described earlier. However, there was this largely unsatisfied piece of me within that was like, that part of you that wanted to become a therapist, that part of you that really wanted to work deeply with people one-on-one, that just was like, there was still a thirst there. And so several years ago now, probably about, I guess, almost 15 years ago now. Wow, time flies. I heard about this thing called coaching, and it just kept crossing my path, kept coming across my radar screen, and I ignored it until it's like, it was so many times that I thought, Cindy, maybe you just ought to stop and pay attention to this and take a look at this. And what is this all about? So as I did some research and made some phone calls and talked to different organizations and individuals who were doing this thing called coaching, I realized, like, well, this isn't therapy, but this is something that would give me the opportunity to work one-on-one with people. And I think it's something I'm going to take a look at. So I enrolled in a coach training program, and I'm going to give a shout out to this coach training program because it fundamentally changed my life. The Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching, otherwise known as IPEC. And I actually teach for them now today. It's something else in my life that I do, in addition to being a leadership strategist and executive coach. And so I went through this program and came out on the other side of it, just a changed person, and realized, like, this is it. This is it for me. This is the work that I'm meant to do in the world. this is the work that there's no question about my voice in the world,
Mm.
because there was such an alignment around this work and who I am that changed everything for me. And you can be sure that change was very much around my values, something that I never gave any kind of thought or consideration to whatsoever.
Yeah, I think your values can be such great guideposts, but unless you know what they are, you can't
Exactly.
use them. So
Right.
let's get into the definition of values for people who maybe don't have that clear. How would you define values? What are they?
Yeah. I mean, it's a fundamental question, yet it's a really important one, because I think it's a word that gets tossed around a lot and may have lost, like, what does it really mean? And, like, why should I pay attention to it? And, I think our values are these principles that we live by. There are, it's like our North Star. Like, when you feel lost, when you feel like you've kind of veered off the path, you look to these guiding principles to help you to know, am I really acting in alignment with what these truths are that I hold to be most dear for me in my life?
Mm.
So, and I come back to mine again and again and again. And it's in the space of living into my values where I am absolutely my happiest, where I am absolutely like this alignment of who I am and what I do in the world. Like, if you told me years ago that this was possible, I would have said, "No, you're out of your mind. You don't know what you're talking about." So, uh, but again, fundamentally, the principles that we live by, guiding principles, just our North Star, is really how I like to think of my values, as my North Star.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that definition. So you mentioned it's your values that really helped you kind of make the shift from this marketing career that you thought you were supposed to have and this coaching uh, calling that you finally answered and felt in your skin doing. So tell me about your values and how they played a role in that shift and how you leverage them to make that move.
Yeah, great question. And I don't know that I would have. Um, I don't know that I would have really thought these were my values until I really thought about my values.
Hmm.
It's funny, but my top two values are freedom and fun.
Wow.
Yeah, see, you're surprised too.
Yeah.
And, I could give you a list of, 10, 15, 20 values that I have, but these are the two core values under which everything else sort of lines up, if you will. And, Brene Brown says, you and I are obviously both fans of Brene Brown, that if you have, 20 values, then you're a Hallmark store, right? Then they're no longer your North Star,
Yeah.
essentially. And so, I love that. That's a very powerful statement to me. And it's not an easy task. And it's something that, for anyone who's watching this and listening to this, I would really challenge you to really hone your values down to two, three at the most. We give you a little bit of leeway there and stretch it to three. But boy, it really gives so much clarity. And so, in my world today now, as opposed to working for somebody else, along the lines of freedom, being an entrepreneur and running my own business, that's freedom. I
Hmm.
mean, that falls squarely there. Now, I'm not saying that you can't work for somebody else and still honor your value of freedom. Entirely possible. And for me, there's something in this freedom of running my own business that is just, I mean, again, it's my top value. So the freedom for the things that I say yes to, the things that I say no to, how I structure my day, my time, how I carve it out, block it out, the clients that I work with. the engagements that I choose to pursue or not pursue. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but it is
Mm.
really at the heart of, running my business and the freedom that I have. And then the fun part of it is, boy, do I have fun in my work. And if I'm not having fun, then something's wrong, right? And that's the beautiful
Mm.
thing about our values. And when we know what they are, we're very intentional about living in alignment with our values. If I'm having a day where I'm not having fun, doesn't mean I'm not working hard, right? But even in my work, even on days that stretch out to be pretty long days, I can tell you that I'm having fun because
Yeah.
there's a lot of purpose in my work. I'm loving the people that I'm working with. I'm loving what I'm doing. And so it's hard work, yes. And it's just, I'm having so much fun. And I'm having fun also because there's a lot of freedom in my work. So they just dovetail together. And I certainly was not experiencing freedom or fun in
Mm.
my former work life.
Yeah. And it
Yeah.
sounds like, in terms of freedom, there's that element of freedom to use your voice, because you talked about, sitting in those marketing meetings or sitting there as a marketing professional and not speaking up or not using your voice. So tell me a little bit about how your value of freedom helped you find your voice.
Ooh, yeah. Well, I would say I feel really free in using my voice. And one of the things that I had fallen into before when I was just not even cognizant of just who I was and what was really important to me is, I fell into this trap. And I think it's common for a lot of us to do where we start playing the perfectionist game,
Mm.
right? So it's like everything's got to be perfect. And that's just like a way of hiding out
Mm.
so that, if I'm doing that, like if I feel like anything that I say could be judged in any way, then I'm not going to say it.
Right.
And so, boy, oh boy, that is so constraining to do that.
Mm.
And that's the life that I was living. And, I was worried about what other people were going to think. And again, if it wasn't perfect, then I wasn't going to say it. I wasn't going to offer it up. And so, because I was so great at judging myself, this is why I didn't speak up, because I was constantly afraid of being judged. Now,
Mm.
where does all that come from? Well, we can trace those roots back to just even, again, all roads lead back to the way we were raised and the messages that we were given. And so let's just say that there's history there. I will say that. But playing that game of, things had to be perfect or people pleasing. Oh my gosh, I was really great at being a people pleaser. That I was good at speaking up around those things. What can I do to earn your love and affection and your approval and your acceptance?
Mm.
And lots of pretending, because there was a lot around that wasn't genuine at all.
Mm.
And then seeking input from other people. Well, what do you think if I do this? And what is your opinion if I do that?
Right.
And really like surveying people to see, well, what do they think? And what's interesting when you do that with other people and you ask other people to share their voice and you take your own voice out of the matter, then whatever guidance or advice they're giving you is coming from their values,
Right.
right? Not from mine. I didn't even know what they were. I never even thought about it. Nobody ever asked me. And I just, I didn't know. So, it's very easy for me to trace these lines and say, gosh, I know now why life felt like it wasn't working for me,
Yeah.
why things felt really heavy, why they felt hard, why everything felt like an uphill climb.
So, knowing now what the importance of getting in touch with our values and figuring out what those top one or two or maybe three are, how do we know what we really value most? How can someone get in touch with that?
Yeah, great, great question. So, one thing to do is think about what is it that makes you happy? I know I'm happy when I feel free.
Mm.
I know I'm happy when I'm having fun.
Hmm.
If I was to tack on what's my third value, I would say purpose. I know that I'm happy when I'm living in alignment with my purpose.
Right.
And so that's one angle, right? To help you to know, it's like, what, like, how do I know when I'm like, when I'm happy, when things feel in alignment for me? Sort of the opposite of that. And I always say this to my clients, if you want to find out what your values are, just wait till somebody crosses them,
So
right?
true.
Yeah. So when you're feeling like frustrated and annoyed, like what just happened there? And that can help you to drill down to your values. So if you find out that somebody lied to you, maybe that's a revelation that honesty is a really important value to me.
Hmm.
Right. And so yeah, there's a couple of ways that you can really think about that. How do I know when I'm really happy? What are the things that make me happy? When am I at my happiest? When do I feel in alignment with who I am? Things feel effortless versus when am I getting annoyed, frustrated, triggered, buttons pushed?
Hmm.
That's those are a couple of ways to really consider how you can illuminate your values.
Yeah, that's a great point. So it's not only what lights us up, but when something really fires us up, it could be
Yes.
a sign of what which value in us is being questioned or compromised.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
great.
really good. I like that, Laura. Lights us up versus fires us up, right? And both of those can give us context for what our values are. It's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good stuff. So in terms of our values, how do they show up in our personal life versus our professional life? Is there a line there? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I think this is something I hear people talk about, uh, I would say frequently.
Hmm.
And the thing is, we don't have this dividing line that goes down the center of us that says, well, this is my personal life and this is my professional life. We're holistic beings, there's an integration there.
Hmm.
And our values, ideally, are consistent and they go with us wherever we go, whether it's my personal life, my professional life. They go with me in my life, period. No delineation. Because if they don't, that's when we're going to get triggered. Our buttons are going to get pushed. We're going to get annoyed and frustrated. So they're really one and the same. And
Hmm.
so it's really important to evaluate, going back to I'm now going to refer to my top three values, right? So when I go back to freedom, fun, and now let's add purpose to it. If I'm interviewing for a job and that's a two-way street, they're evaluating me and I'm evaluating them, I'm evaluating their culture, and I'm assessing, does this feel like a culture in which my values of freedom and fun and purpose can really be honored here? That
Hmm.
I can honor them and that there's space within this organization and within this culture for those to really come alive here.
Yeah,
So
that's a
no
great point.
delineation.
I
Yeah.
agree. I know sometimes when I'm working with people to help them identify their values, they'll say, "Oh, these are my work ones, and these are my professional or my personal ones," and that in itself tells a bit of a story. And so, I like that you've kind of made that hard note of we are our whole human self, whether we're showing up at work or personally, and our values stay within us.
Yeah. And just to add to that, when we're doing something different, let's say in our work life, because now I feel like I have to show up in a different way,
Hmm.
now there's some inauthenticity about me that's being expressed,
Mm.
right? Because I've stepped away from who I really and truly am. And now you're not getting the fullest expression of who I am because I've disconnected from who I am and now I'm playing a role.
Yeah,
And that's just going to take us away from giving our best.
absolutely. Can our values ever get us in trouble?
That's a good question. Can they get us in trouble? Well, I guess they could when somebody else has values that are very different from ours. And
Mm.
this can happen, oh my gosh, this can happen in the workplace. This can happen in our most intimate relationships,
Mhm.
right? And so they can, I might reframe that a little bit where we can get into conflict And it's we can recognize that conflict and kind of slow down and really dissect what's going on there and really drill it down to a difference in values. Boy, that really helps us when we're having conflict. And I think
Yeah.
it was Melinda Gates who said this, that if we can, in times of conflict, if we can have a values discussion, that is going to go a long way in helping us. And then it's just to get, curious about, if you and I get into a conflict about something and we see that it's just a difference in values, then I'm going to get really curious about you and what's important to you. And hopefully you'll get curious about me and what's important to me. And by the way, that builds tremendous trust and connection between people. So it's being able to just kind of step back and say, you know what? I'm going to say something very obvious. We don't all hold the same values. So let's just get curious and really get into the world of the other person and know what it is that they value, what's their North Star, and how do we, this is going to sound really cheesy, but it just came to mind, so I'm going to share it. How do we navigate among the stars here, right? Your
Yeah.
North Star, my North Star. How do we navigate that?
Yeah. So there's that whole concept of our personal values that might help shed some light when we do come into conflict. But there's also organizational values that become everyone's North Stars who are meant to contribute within that organization. So, how does that come into play in terms of an organization's values versus our personal values?
Yeah. So I think number one, what's important in an organization is not just that they have values, because I don't know that I've ever met an organization that didn't have values, but I've met a lot of organizations that didn't have words underneath that in terms of what does it look like? How do we know that we're living this value? How do we know that we're working in concert with this value?
Hmm.
And in other words, it's operationalizing those values. So, in order for me to know what integrity is, for example, what does the company say that integrity looks like within this culture?
Right.
And so, if I know what that is, and that's very clear to me, and by the way, this is a very good idea for organizations to do this, but not a lot of organizations do this where the behaviors become very clear and that can lead to trouble. And so if I know what they are, then when I say yes to working with that organization or for that organization, then I'm also saying yes to working in alignment with the values as you've laid them out here. It's very, very clear. And
Hmm.
then as I look at those and I consider them with my own personal values, I have to discern, do these go together? Are we a good fit? Can I honor theirs? Can they honor mine? Can we come together and honor each other's values? And that's when we'll do great things together. And, I'm just reminded of a story of a company that I was working for. And the list of values were hanging on the wall. And values were not really talked about, but they were on the wall. And I remember coming to work one day and the it was like a series of panels that were posted together and the panels started falling, just kind of dangling off the wall. And I thought, "Oh, that doesn't look good when our values are dangling off the wall." And they dangled and they continued to just kind of by piece fall off the wall. And I think that that really said a lot
Mm.
about what the organization thought of its values in terms of, I think a lot of organizations do this. People might see values hanging on a wall, but aren't necessarily working in concert with what those values are,
Hmm.
especially if people aren't evaluated on the basis of how well are you living these values? How well are you in step with what the culture of this organization is? If we don't have that in an organization, then it becomes very hard it's hard to hold people accountable to living up to values that just aren't operationalized. They're not being, by the way, those values in terms of behavior aren't being modeled, especially from the highest levels of the organization, then nobody really feels like they're all that important. Does it really matter? And that's when culture can go sideways and things can get messy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the greatest discomforts is working in an organization whose values don't align with yours. And I think it's the most probably a huge indicator for, retention or not,
Yes.
or there an employee's willing or readiness to leave an organization. And it will also just create so much discomfort, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's being able to say that, you know what, this isn't a fit for me. And that's
Yeah.
it's not even it's not right or wrong, it's not good or bad. It's just it is what it is. It's, like any other relationship. It's like, well, this actually I thought this was going to work for me and I've really worked hard to do my part in making it work out and it's probably time for me to move on to my next chapter. It's just, it is what it is.
Yeah.
And just, and having the clarity perhaps of why it's
Right.
not working and that's okay. Great. What
Yeah.
did I learn? What did I gain? And how can I take what I've learned here as I move forward?
Yeah. Great
Yeah.
point. I love that. So just wrapping up here, what do you think leaders can do to leverage the individuals on their teams to leverage their values to help kind of manage their teams and their employees?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind in answer to that question is to ask your team members what their values are.
Yes.
Right? I mean, wow. I don't know that I've ever been asked that question in any organization that I've worked in,
Right.
uh, that people even know what my values are. Of course, I didn't know them for a long time myself, so I don't even know if I could have answered the question, even if somebody did ask me.
Hmm.
So get curious, find out what those values are, and what does it mean to that person? What does it look like when you are really living in alignment with those values? What does it look like when you're not? Because when we know that about another person, again, not only does it build connection and it can build trust, but then you can leverage that person's strengths, let's say. What are the opportunities given what their values are in terms of different things on the team, in terms of where they contribute and how they contribute and so forth. So that's really important. And also for the leader to know their values and to convey that to the team. Like let's all be clear on what each other's values are. Here's why this is important to me. Here's what it looks like for me to be living out this value. And boy, this is what will turn this value sideways for me. And so there's an expression. Let's see if I can remember it, Laura, in this moment. It's like, know my values, know me. No values, know me. If that makes sense.
It does. All right, Cindy. So to wrap things up, there's always three questions that I ask all of my guests at the end.
Okay.
So my first question is, what is one thing for leaders to know or do right now?
Well, I can't help but relate it to what we were just talking about with values, really, is to know their value, know their values, know both of those things, and to really know what it looks like to put them into practice. Because when we do that, we're going to feel a greater sense of ease and flow, less weight, less effort, and less being triggered by other people. Or at least when we are triggered, we can at least trace it to, okay, it's because this value wasn't being honored. No more, no less. That's what that means. Okay.
Mm.
So, yeah, I can't help but answer that question by relating it to values, quite honestly.
Yeah. And I'd like to supplement that by throwing down the challenge for any leader who's watched this who hasn't yet asked their team what their values are to go ahead and do that and have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
Great. What self-care practice is currently bringing you balance?
This is interesting. One of the things that I've been very intentional about lately, and I do consider it self care, is saying no.
Mm,
And that's about establishing boundaries
yeah.
so that I don't create overwhelm for myself, and which is going to, if I say yes to everything, then I'm going to probably end up with overwhelm and resentment.
Mm.
And it's okay, right? It's okay to say no. And for a long time, I thought that that was something that I'd be judged for if I said no, if people are asking me for my time, for my ideas, for whatever it is. And it's not that I don't want to give that and want to be available to people all the time. Actually, I don't want to be available to people all the time because it will overrun me. So
Yeah.
so my self-care practice is saying no. And I once heard a quote that said, you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. It's okay to say no.
Mm.
And I go to this quote time and time again and remind myself that me saying no is not a reflection on my value as a human being.
Right.
And it was for many, many years in my life.
Yeah.
I equated my value to that.
I think it is a reflection of your values, though, of fun and freedom, because you can't have either of those things if you said yes to everything.
Yes, way to tie that together, Laura. It's so like, yes, 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 spot on.
Yeah, no is a full sentence. And I think it's such a
It's a full
powerful
sentence.
tool. Absolutely. So I'm glad you brought that to light. So the
Mhm.
last question is, I find that I have such a long list of professional development or leadership development books that I want to read, and I just haven't gotten to yet. So I ask all of my guests, what's one thing that you're digging into right now? And can you give us a key takeaway or maybe the Coles Notes version of that book or resource?
Yeah, well, I am definitely a book person, and every time I listen to a podcast and they're interviewing the author of the book, and oh, you got to buy this book, I'm like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
there's another one that's going into my account. And so the one that I'm reading right now, and I've just started digging into it, is called Burnout.
Ooh.
And what's interesting about this is that, and I'm only a few pages in, like, honestly, I'm barely through the first chapter.
Hmm.
But early on, I think it was even before chapter one, maybe it's part of the introduction, they talk about human giver syndrome,
Mm.
which is something that applies to a lot of us who are in the helping profession, which, being a coach, I consider myself to be in the helper profession, where there's a lot of output of energy, right? Giving, 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 where, as the title of the book points to, burnout. And so as I go further into this book, it's about what the prescription is. I think around this human giver syndrome.
Mm.
And so I'm already starting with saying no. So what, that book and my own sort of self-care step that I'm very intentional about right now really dovetail together. And so this human giver syndrome is something that's pretty epic proportions that are going on in the world with this, particularly for women. And
Mm.
so yeah, so I'm eager to continue flipping the pages of that book.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'll put a link to that as well as the podcast because they were on both, I think, the Unlocking Us and Dare to Lead podcast,
Yeah, yeah,
talking about
really
the
great
book.
stuff.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for joining me today to
Oh
talk
my
about
gosh.
values, to share your story and your experience. I think so many people will be able to relate and see themselves in that. So, yeah, I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Laura. It was just a joy to be with you.